Assalamu alaikum everyone. Hello, welcome to the Cur8 Capital Founder Spotlight Series, Episode 3. And today we have a very special founder with us, Sohaib Ahmed from Neuphonic. Welcome, Sohaib.
Thank you.
Sohaib is building the voice for AI, and we're going to basically get into that. But before that, I want to sort of take a step back and talk to you, Sohaib, about your childhood. Like, give us a glimpse of where you're from, the journey, what got you here.
So my journey is a bit different, maybe. I was actually born in Ireland. My parents are Pakistani, but they moved to Ireland for my dad's work. So my dad, he worked in the halal meat industry.
So any side ventures in childhood? Any business?
Yeah, I think because my father was in business, I think a part of him always wanted to see one of the kids, or maybe even all of the kids in business. So at the age of, I think, 13, 14, I did what everyone did, really, like selling sweets at school. I should say prior to that, I would always go with my dad to his work. So I think at the age of 8, I was going to the meat factories on Saturday mornings. Then at the age of 13, I started to sell sweets in school whilst working in the hotel now. On the weekends. And yeah, from there it kind of did develop, and I did a few interesting things actually. So at the age of 14, 15, I had an electronics business online, and I was also doing this interesting thing where I would buy something cheap from eBay and sell it on Amazon.
Arbitrage.
Yeah, it was pure arbitrage because there was a trust differential between eBay and Amazon. So this is in 2006.
Amazing.
And that's how I was making my pocket money.
Amazing.
So I'd work on the weekend and then do the trading during the...
Amazing. So, and then you sort of went to university, to Birmingham, right? And you did undergrads there. Tell us about uni life. How was it?
It was good. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew I vaguely wanted to do something in banking. But knowing that you want to become a trader is quite a long decision to make. So I got into Birmingham University and got really involved with the societies. And there I realized that because we were a bit far away from London, I needed there to be a reason for the employers in London to kind of come to Birmingham and find more about us. You have to stand out. So I organized this student financial conference. There we had, I think, close to 300 students attending, with also a lot of the top employers coming to do talks, and also just general recruitment. And that whole experience of getting speakers, getting sponsors, organizing the event, it made me quite immersed in the financial community, even as a student. So that's where I learned a lot about who does what and why they do it. But yeah, I was playing sports, and Birmingham Uni is quite a good uni as well. So the work was hard, but I tried to make time to also focus on my career.
Amazing. I would argue you had the trader DNA in you. You were selling stuff from eBay to Amazon.
Yeah.
And then you decided to become a quant right after school, right?
Yeah, it was a weird one. Somebody recommended I learn programming. So I started to learn programming in my second year, which was totally outside of my degree. My degree in mathematical economics, you didn't really need to know programming for it. It was more just about maths and stats. But once I learned programming, and because I was interested in trading, I just tried to automate everything. Be it my trading, be it my uni work, be it anything. It was trying to automate it because I was quite busy. There wasn't a business behind it. It was just I'm so busy. But then when I joined, when I did my internship in my second year with Lloyd's Banking Group, there I began to automate a bunch of work on the desks that I was on, and they loved it. They were like, "Oh, this is really, really helpful." And then that just transcended to on my grad scheme when we were interviewing with the different desks. I think my technical capabilities came across, and that's how I got the job in quant, because then quant wasn't a big thing. It was quite a esoteric small part of the business.
And neither was speech, language, and ML. Those were not big things back then. But you decided to sort of go to Cambridge and study these. Where does the speech element come in? What sort of got you there? Because now we see, and now if you look back in hindsight, it says, oh yeah, that's pretty obvious. But back then, nobody was talking about this. This wasn't a thing to do.
No, even then it was weird. People are like, why are you going to do that? The big connection that happened to me was, when I think about doing something, I always try to copy what the best people in the world are doing. And at that point in time, there's a hedge fund called Renaissance Technologies. They were number one in the space. And a bunch of their founders were real pioneers in speech. And if you think about that analogy between signal processing and financial time series, there's a bit of a connect. So for me, I was like, well, it makes sense actually to not only learn machine learning, which is what I was toying with in my job, but also to think about, okay, let's just take a step back. Let's actually learn the fundamental basics. And if the best guys in the business and finance have learned speech and kind of, used it to some degree, maybe I should think about that. And that's what made this program particularly compelling, because I knew that I was going to improve my stats and math skills, but I also might learn something from a different discipline that I know the legends in the space have, and maybe I can learn a bit of that and implement that as well.
And you went back to trading then, right? So
yeah,
this learning of speech, and you did I think trading for 8 more years after that?
Yeah.
So this learning speech and language training, did you get a chance to apply it?
I tried.
Did they have an inside Jim Simmons and all?
Yeah, I tried quite a lot, but it's not straightforward because a lot of the speech models, then and now, are quite complicated. And it's a very, very big multi-step process. I think at the crux of it, the best analogy to give is when I talk English and you talk English, even though we sound different, the kind of core structure of how we say words is to some degree similar. In finance, that's not particularly true. The reason why one stock moves in relation to another stock can change almost on a daily basis. So that underlying structure is just not comparable. There are parts of what I learned that I moved across, but it was quite difficult to move everything across.
So tell me one thing. So we've seen a lot of quants who then become entrepreneurs, and they say that traders have some sort of blueprint to becoming entrepreneurs. What's about the job that prepares you better to be an entrepreneur going forward?
I think, in my career, or when I was working as a quant, I would often think in a very modular way. So you have the data part, so ingesting data, you have data cleaning, then you have data checks to make sure that the data is actually sensible. Then you have signal processing, actually creating trading signals from the data. Then you have signal checks. In my mind, it's very modular. And I think once you kind of use that paradigm in your daily life, try to modularize as much as you can then identify weaknesses really quickly, because you're well, these 5 parts of the process are working really well. This one part here is what everyone's complaining about. And if you tackle that, everything should flow. Any weakness in the system, you would feel it straight away by losing money. So that feedback loop is instantaneous. Any problem in this kind of modular process results in instant feedback, because either you make money or you lose money. And you can put maths around that to kind of gear your understanding. Likewise, in the business, you're often outward facing. So then customer feedback can tell you whether you're doing something well or not. But I think the true skill behind that is matching that customer feedback to the different parts in the business. So is it are you too slow? Is your quality too bad? And I think that's what's interesting about the quant paradigm and the business paradigm.
And would it be fair to say that sort of hones in your problem solving skills? You're sort of getting very real time feedback. You're having to go back, solve a problem, go back again, get feedback, and that loop, that virtuous cycle keeps on going and going. And 8 years of training of that, and then you felt you were ready for becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think so. When I left my master's, almost all of my class went into tech. So then the class was only 25 people, 24 imagine go to tech, and just me going into finance, which...
You were making more money though.
Well, I don't know, but I was doing well for someone in the 20s, alhamdulillah. But I think what's interesting is that I had to trade through some of the most volatile periods, right? Like COVID, the Russian invasion. There were more domain-specific parts, like the VIX explosion in 2018. These moments when you see everything that you know get tipped upside down, overnight, they're quite scary to kind of live through and even to trade through. But it hones your focus on what actually matters. A lot of what we see these days can be superfluous. It can be a bit extra. If you actually boil it down to what matters, there are only really 2 or 3 things that you need to get right. And I think the experience that I had as a quant gave me the ability to identify those pain points brutally, honestly, and also hopefully quickly.
Amazing. So then you decided to start Neuphonic.
Yeah.
And walk us through like what's going on in your mind. Like you're trading, you've just traded through this volatile period. It's 2024. Things seem to have improved or like settled down in terms of volatility. And then you say, okay, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, build something in speech and voice. Walk us through that phase.
So I think my career was going good. I mean, 10 years as a quant, it's pretty good going. And alhamdulillah, like the things I'd achieved in my career, I was quite proud of. The place I was working was fantastic as well. And the friend actually gave me this advice. He was like, you should almost live your life in like 10-year chunks. And you think about what you've done in your 20s and 30s, and normally that's a good time to think about what's next. For me, the kind of core objectives that I'd set myself as like an 18-year-old, 19-year-old being like, I want to do that in finance. To some degree, I'd achieved a lot of it. So the pain to get to the next level in finance, there was a part of me which was a bit like, I don't even know if I really want to get to that point. Like it's really interesting, it'd be cool to achieve. But to be honest, I think a lot of the barriers in AI, where I was spending a lot more of my free time, like I was spending a lot of time with my friends working in startups, looking at their project. I was investing in a couple of startups myself as well. So then I was like, actually, I should probably make this my full-time thing. But I did the thing that everyone says you're not really meant to do, which is when I left my company, I didn't really have an idea, right? Like I had absolutely no idea. But at the same time, I didn't take any time off. Almost like the next morning, I woke up, I think 7 a.m. and I was like, right, it's time to rediscover the world. So for the next couple of months, I was just out there, like going to every conference, every roadshow in London, just with my school bag, right? And then talking to everyone about every problem in the world. It was almost to some degree aimless. But for me, I quite like that chaotic environment where you find little pieces of information. Especially as a person who's quite knowledgeable about AI, it was really interesting to see A, how analog the world is, but then B, in particular, why. And I often found that when I talk to companies, there are so many problems around integrating AI or really using AI in the way that the business needed. And that at the crux of it has a few issues. Number one, like there's an education aspect. And then number two, there's that whole kind of integration. Like you can have a really good solution, but if a company can't use it easily, it's just not a good match.
And how did you zone into like voice? So you said like, I can understand like you had this background in like speech and all, but then why voice?
So voice in particular, I studied it, right? So I know it fairly well. But then B, as part of this kind of like discovery phase, I was already quite good friends, but me and my co-founder Jamong, we started to spend a lot more time together. And our network in the voice AI space was quite big. So that allowed us to actually talk to a lot of businesses very directly and very quickly. We also find it quite interesting because voice AI has been around for a long time, but it's never really had its kind of game changer movement. So you had things like Siri, Alexa, which to some degree were really interesting things to play with, but they never overly changed society. And that was one thing that we just couldn't figure out why. What was missing in voice AI that meant that it could never be bigger and more utilized?
And that was latency.
It's a couple of things. Latency is one of the big problems, but I think what kind of pushed us further into this world was the fact that often cognition, the cognitive aspect of it was probably the most important thing. And because LLMs transcended that to have really high, like ChatGPT, because that transcended the kind of world into like, now you can actually message AI really well. The big question was, how do we take it to the next level? How do you actually interact and talk to it? And that's where latency became a really big pain point. A lot of these models are so big that they're quite slow, or they're on a server somewhere. So you have network latency and it can be quite expensive. And that's where things like latency on device deployment, they become a lot more interesting.
Amazing. And in terms of like the interface, so you chose voice, you mentioned that, Alexa, Siri were there, but they never really became the interface in which we sort of interacted with digital, realms. And now there's this open debate of what the future interface is going to be.
Yeah.
Like, is it going to be chat like ChatGPT? Is it going to be like a typical GUI, voice, or like virtual reality? What's your take? Like, someone who's building in voice, like, what's your take on, how we interact with technology going forward or in the future?
I think as humans, we use voice so well because it's like the easiest way for us to communicate. Now, when you're a computer, it's a little bit different, right? Because you can type, which is a bit slow. You can, as humans as well, like sometimes we show things, right? Like we'll do a dance or like we'll wave to each other, right? And that's almost like a different modality. So voice is very important for humans because that's what we're used to. But I really think the final frontier will be something multimodal. But regardless of whichever way you think about it, voice is going to be central to it. There are just times at which voice is so important to your communication that it's really hard to ignore. For example, talking over the telephone. Like you kind of need to use your voice, right? It's hard to use any other modality. If you're doing something in person, you can type. But
it'd be odd like if I'm like, typing and showing it to you right now.
Yeah, exactly.
You need the voice over there. Amazing. So, but when we sort of enter this realm in which, like we're interacting with AI in a multimodal way, and that's a future that's going to come. But right now we see like, even with the chat interface, with humans interacting with AI, that sort of really picked up with the likes of like character AI. You can chat to like, famous celebrities from the past. And what do you think that effect is like in terms of like human to human communication or human to AI communication? Because we already are going through like a loneliness epidemic or pandemic, if you want to call it. What's your take on that? Like, I feel like it's a very interesting combination.
I think there's a few kind of topics, but so on the one side, for example, there are a lot of things in modern society where AI is going to be very useful for. So, for example, education, healthcare, robotics, right? Like these industries need communication. Like communication is almost central to them, and they've been underserved from a communication standpoint. Like language learning apps, it's often helpful to have somebody teaching you a new language. On the flip side with this technology, because it is very horizontal, it kind of impacts every industry almost at the same time. You do have this other industry emerging of like almost the digital identity.
Like the friend.com.
Character AI. And there it becomes a bit more interesting because I think the use cases there are, again, very subjective to the person. Some people are lonely, so they need someone to talk to. Some people need an advisor. Some people need a teacher. And some people need a therapist, right? Some people also just need friends. So then,
What exactly do you guys do? And who's your customer? What's the problem you're solving? And how do you sort of, where you guys are in terms of the journey?
So Neuphonic, we specialize in ultra low latency text to speech. So what that means is we create human-like speech very quickly, essentially. And we do it in such a way that you can integrate voice AI into your products. We're really taking a more B2B approach in the sense that we want to work with companies and individuals who are integrating voice AI into products. So you might have a indie hacker, you might have a solopreneur, or you might have a large enterprise. So as part of that, they use our products.
And how do you map out this space, like in terms of like the players out there? They're like the big players. I know like ChatGPT has this multimodal feature that they kind of demoed like a few months back. I'm sure like other players also operating in different verticals. How do you, in your head as an entrepreneur operating in this space, segment this?
So I think the interesting thing about our technology is that it's horizontal. Low latency text to speech has been a problem for a long time in a number of verticals. What that means is we actually want to remain horizontal as like a provider of voice AI across industries. And the reason we've taken that approach is because when we spoke to people from every industry, whether it was healthcare or education or robotics, they all had the same pain points. So to maintain like a large business, it's good to actually satisfy people in many verticals. It can be a little bit harder to kind of tackle vertical specific pain points. But what we've seen from our competitors and from the industry as a whole is that if you can level up the whole kind of industry or like the whole horizontal at the same time.
So sort of like, who are some of the customers like who are using like Neuphonic?
So we are quite early. So we're working with a number of customers globally. And that's the interesting thing about AI. You start pretty global from day one. So we're working, for example, with a lot of companies who are doing call center AI. That's actually quite cool for like overflow problems. So in situations where, you know, a receptionist might be busy or, you know, you have thousands of calls per day, it's quite useful to have an AI who can kind of guide you. So that's like one horizontal that we're talking to. Another horizontal is the education space. So language learning is a really interesting vertical because you do have that role play, which is quite interesting. Robotics is another really interesting place. As we move to a future where humanoid robots are becoming a reality, they also need a voice capability. Healthcare is another place as well. A lot of services do require communication with patients, not in terms of like replacing a doctor, but more administrative tasks.
Got it. And in terms of like, so you just mentioned like a while ago that, you know, you go global on day one.
Yeah.
So global means like many languages, many cultures, many more nuances. How does that intersection look like between, you know, different languages, getting them to the voice and like capturing really, because what necessarily, you know, means in one language does not translate perfect into English and then into voice. Like some statements would be specific to that culture, language. How do you capture this nuance from language?
Yeah, we find it quite difficult actually. We are going multilingual very soon because it's just a customer requirement. It's something that everyone wants. But there are particular nuances. For example, in Arabic, I think there's over 15 dialects. So regardless of which data source you look at or which rules you apply, there's just so much more that you need. So you have to be quite careful, both in terms of the data curation and also the rules around the language and how your model understands those rules. So I think those two challenges are quite difficult, but we are finding ways around those problems. So finding, you know, different data sources. We actually hire voice actors as well, so all of our data is commercially usable. That for me was a new experience, like interviewing and hiring voice actors. But it's central to our product. So it's so important for us to get good data and a lot of good data.
Amazing. And in terms of like, is the data like a bottleneck at any point?
It can be, yeah, for especially further and less developed countries. Often their languages can be harder to source. So for example, Arabic, there's 17 dialects, right? You need to have very specific information and very specific data for the 12th dialect, which is hard. So you have to do extra work to source that.
Got it. Now, just about to wrap this up, I want to ask you like some questions about you as a founder. Like, you know, so how's the journey been? What have you sort of like learned from this journey?
Yeah.
And what would you sort of advise anybody who's sort of thinking of taking the jump?
My founder as an experience has been quite interesting because coming from a traditionally like a research background to now running a company, there are a lot of new things that you're learning on a daily basis. Not only like man management, but also like how to deal with customers and how to kind of deal with enterprises. So I think that experience is making this probably one of the most formative periods of my life. I think the amount that you learn and the amount that you have to continuously learn just changes you as a person. And I think it's a good thing. I'm becoming a better version of myself.
Thank you so much, Sohaib. Thank you for joining us and sharing with us the future of voice AI. If anybody from the audience wants to, you know, get in touch with Sohaib, have any questions, put them in the comment box or just reach out to the Cur8 Capital team. Best of luck, Sohaib, and we look forward to you doing amazing things.
Thank you.